Riley Gaines, how are you, my friend? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. It's great to have you.
Thank you. This is a very exciting conversation for me, so I could not be more grateful and really honored to be on and talking with you. So thank you, Jason.
Absolutely. Let's start with author. Is it weird to say that Riley Gaines is an author? Your new book, Swimming Against the Current, released back on May 21st. How's that feel to be now an author?
I have so many titles and hats that I wear now that I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined or even wanted for myself. So to have author as one of my many roles now, it's just amazing. It's amazing that the doors that God opens, of course, the doors that He closes as well. It's been a whirlwind to say the least, but it was a really fun process to be able to kind of recount my experience competing against a male. All that entailed. Ultimately, diving into how we got to where we are now, the trajectory of where we're going, and what we can do as everyday people, as common sense Americans who intuitively know that men and women are different.
Yeah, common sense. We'll get into that in a little bit, and we'll certainly talk more about the book in a second. But let's bring it back to the thing that we do that maybe a lot of other shows don't, and that's keep Jesus in the conversation. Let's talk about Christ in your life. Tell me about who Jesus is to Riley Gaines today.
Gosh, today, central in everything that I do. I'll tell you, I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a family where I have two wonderful parents who love each other very much, who took us to church, me and my many siblings, every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, which I'll be totally honest with you was a drag when you're 10 years old and you're the youngest one in the congregation by at least 70 years. Me and my
Yep.
siblings, the amount of little visitor cards in the back of the pews that we would play tic-tac-toe on, or hangman, or any game that we could possibly play that averted our attention away from the sermon and the message is probably ungodly. But now, of course, having grown up, graduated from college, matured to a degree, I could not be more grateful for that foundation that my parents instilled in me. And so these past 2 years, since I've really embraced this advocacy role, I've been awakened in so many different ways. Of course, in the political realm, but most importantly, and most drastically, really, the way that I have been eye-opened is spiritually. Just understanding now more than ever. And Paul warns us. He tells us that we, in Acts and Romans and different places, he tells us that we'll reach a point where dark is seen as light, and bitter is seen as sweet, and evil is seen as moral. And it's undeniable that that's not where we're at right now. And look, that's not me saying that I think people who identify as trans or whatever are evil. No, I don't think that. But deceit is evil, and manipulation is evil, and lying and affirming a delusion, that's evil. And who's the father of lies? Who moves through deceit and in darkness?
Yeah.
God's opposition does. So understanding that the battle has already been won. Look, that's why I'm able to do this with a smile on my face, forward facing, going into the belly of the beast many a times, because that's where the message is needed. And I'm secure in the fact that, yes, I'm standing for objective truth. Yes, I'm standing for biological reality, but more importantly, I'm standing for biblical truth.
Yeah. Where was the turning point for you? I mean, I talk to a lot of people I did not grow up in a home that was really faith filled. I went to church a little bit here and there, but it wasn't until I was in my late 20s till I was introduced to the gospel for the first time. You had this foundation, much like my daughter does, of growing up in church, but eventually you become, like you said, an adult, you go to college, and this faith has to become your own. Was there a turning point that you can point to where you realized, okay, I've been living off mom and dad's faith for a while. Now it's time to make this my own.
Absolutely. To your point, yes, went off to college. I didn't go to church at all, really, at first, upon first going off to college. I figured, Sundays are my one day to sleep in. I don't need to go. I have such a background. I'm fine. But then COVID hit, really. I think that was a big a big eye opener for me. COVID hit my sophomore year of college. And that's when I felt like God did a lot of exposing during that time. Um, I got to see, of course, how academia responded to this. I got to see how our government responded to this. I got to see how corporate America responded to this. And my eyes were just kind of opened. Not fully at this point, but starting to, at this point, be less naive to the surrounding world. We were able to return back to college eventually after a couple months at home during, from March to I think August of
Yeah.
2020. Finally, we're able to return back, and I made a priority to go to church every Sunday from really that point on. So that was, I would say, when my faith became my own. But even looking back now, I still don't think at that time I had a good grasp. I was kind of going through the motions. Yes, I was listening. Yes, those things when I would attend church, but I don't know if I acted in my day-to-day life like a church goer, like a Christian, like someone who embodies Christ and his message. And so that's when I started really spending more time in scripture, reading his word, his gospel, of course, in prayer, spending time with people around me who are strong in their faith, really acting as anchors, even still in my life. And I kind of understood this cycle really. And to know God, when you know God, or I guess to know God, is to love him. And when you love him, you obey him. And when you obey him, he reveals himself to you, causing you to know him more. And it's almost this cycle that I found myself falling into. And it really starts by, of course, reading scripture and actually knowing and communicating with God.
Riley Gaines is with us here on Sports Spectrum. If I was talking to Riley Gaines in 2018, graduating high school, all entrenched in swimming, right? Getting ready to go do the things that you did at Kentucky. Where do you think you would have told me you would be now at age 24, 6 years later?
I would be in dental school, is what I would tell you, which is exactly
Dental
where I
school.
was after college. I was in dental school, set to specialize in endodontics, weirdly enough, which is root canals.
Hmm.
That's what I was set to do. So to say that this position that I've been thrusted into is a total 180, that's an understatement. I knew nothing about our civil process or civics in general. I never had to take a government course. I knew we had three branches of government. I didn't know what they did. I still don't know what they do. I don't even think they know what they do, to be totally honest with you. My public speaking courses in college, I mean, my face turned the color of a tomato. So by no means did I ever, as I said, anticipate to be where I'm at now. And I often question, I'm like, God, why? Why me? I'm not prepared for this. I'm not the person who is the most equipped for this. But I understood, and pretty quickly actually, that God doesn't call those who he has equipped. He equips those who he calls. And if he brings you to it, he will certainly bring you through it. Just as he did with, I mean, you can look through the Bible and find these examples, just as he did with Moses, who led the Israelites out with Aaron and his staff, and just as he did with Joshua, who he promised a victory over the Canaanites, and just as he did with Esther when she was brought before the king. So understanding all of those things, I just pray for wisdom. I pray for strength. I pray for guidance. I pray for protection daily. But he provides. He instills those things.
Yeah, I just think if you go back to 2.5 years ago, around the time when all of this was starting to take place, you think about pivots in the road, right? Where you go left or you go right, and you're thinking, okay, God, I'm going to be, working, going to dental school, maybe become a dentist or work in this area, and suddenly there's a pivot, and God is pointing you towards an area that I'm guessing had a lot of tension. This is where I want to kind of go here. Was when this all took place in 2022, and Leah Thomas, and you're swimming, and you find out kind of the situation that's going on. What was the wrestling and the tension like with God, if there even was any of that?
It was weird, honestly, kind of in the way that we found out that this was even happening. This was never even a scenario that remotely ever even crossed my mind that could potentially happen.
Right.
Um, was in my senior year of college, had accomplished some really great things that I'll forever be proud of in my first 3 years. 12-time All-American, 5-time SEC champion, the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time, 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. The list goes on, but again, to just reiterate, it was a lifelong journey up until this point. And so senior year, of course, rolls around, and this name pops up. This name that none of us had ever heard of before. Not myself, not my teammates, not my competitors, not my coaches, none of us. And it's the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas, who is leading the nation by body lengths in multiple events, ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is, of course, a sprint event, and all of the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is, of course, long distance. And for all those sports fans out there, even if you don't necessarily understand swimming, I mean, think about that last piece in terms of your Olympic runners. That's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner.
Right.
It doesn't happen. Those are two totally different systems. But that's what we were seeing in this person named Leah Thomas. And so I'm so confused because at this point, where as he was leading the nation in the 200 free, I was ranked third, trailing the girl in second by a few 100ths, a girl I knew very well because, like in most sports, your top tier athletes know of each other, regardless of where you compete, because you'd grown up competing against each other.
Sure.
But I saw this name, and it was a threat to me, right? A threat to my chances to win a national title, which was certainly my goal. And so I'm looking up this person, no history. This person didn't exist virtually. And to just really get back to your question of how I handled this, this tension, when I found out that Leah Thomas is actually Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania, the way I responded was, I think, how anyone would respond in viewing something that is almost satirical. I mean, it really felt like objectively funny at first. I kind of removed myself from the situation and looked at this for what it was. And I kind of thought it was comical. It's like a SNL skit or like a South Park episode or like a Babylon Bee headline, which are meant to be funny. And so I didn't tackle this head on initially. I really didn't. I just kind of removed myself and thought to myself, there's no way he'll actually be allowed to compete with us when it matters, because everyone knows this is a man. Like the parable of the emperor wears no clothes. I thought to myself, everyone can see that this is a naked man, no pun intended. But lo and behold, that is not the response that the NCAA had, or the Biden administration had, or our individual universities, or the International Olympic Committee. That's not the response that any of these governing bodies or entities had. They saw nothing wrong with this. And that's when it became real for me. Actually, not even did they see nothing wrong with it. They told us we were the problem if we did see something wrong with it. They told us that we needed to seek counseling service to make ourselves feel comfortable seeing male genitalia in the locker room. Literally verbatim, they said to re-educate ourselves. And then I'm thinking to myself, hold on, this really isn't this lighthearted comical joke anymore. This isn't a circus. This is real life. This is reality. This has real implications. And that's when those feelings of intriguement, of this comedic relief almost, that's when they shifted to heartbreak and demoralization, honestly. Watching the girls in tears, the parents, the moms in the stands, watching their daughters be obliterated in their sport that they once loved at that national championships in 2022. Feeling the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact, fully exposing himself, inches away from where you were simultaneously undressing, hearing the whispers of girls who, and that's what they were whispers of anger and frustration from those girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get here, to that meet, the pinnacle of collegiate sports, really our sport in general. The NCAA championships, the U.S. is so deep, has so many fast swimmers. It's comparatively, it's more competitive and faster than the Olympics. And we were being forced to compete against a less than mediocre man. and no one
Yeah.
saw the problem with it. And so I felt angry for a little bit, to be honest with you. Not angry with Thomas. This is honestly, he was just following the rules. I felt angry with the NCAA. I felt angry with the people who were supposed to be protecting us, whether that be our coaches, our administration, um, what have you. There's a lot of fingers to point, and I did. For a while, I felt angry with God. You know, I worked hard to be here. You're going to let that be overshadowed? My team, you know, we wanted to be a top 10 team, which we were able to successfully do in my collegiate career. But really, this is what this is about. And now looking back, I understand the bigger picture, and of course how he uses people in unfortunate circumstances to propagate his message, his word.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've had so many people that you've talked to as you've shared this story kind of have the same response I have. But I mean, I have one child. She's a daughter. She's going to be 20 very soon, and I love her obviously to death. She played sports in high school. She played softball. She played volleyball. And when your story hit, I was thinking about her. I'm like, okay, what if that was the same situation, but not swimming, but volleyball or softball for that matter? And personally, I would have been really angry, like just because of the common sense side of this, which is what you've been saying, since you came on this show in the beginning of the conversation was common sense, like common sense truth. And the fact that this is thrusted into, I mean, it's just the fact that it's become political is just mind blowing to me. I do not like politics. I don't like getting involved. I know you're heavily involved in it. I hate it because it usually pits one side versus the other. And in this, it's become so political that I've been painted in myself, even just in my own prayers, to a side that I don't want to be on a side. Like I want unity in the body of Christ and in this world. And yet it's just common sense to me. And it blows my mind, Riley, that this has become what it's become 2 years later.
That's the truth. If there's one thing that should not be politicized, it's sports. Sports is the place you go to abandon all identity factors. We don't look at
Yeah.
race in sports. Well, I mean, we shouldn't look at race in sports. We don't look at any sort of sexual orientation. We don't look at religion even in sports. That's where you go to almost, I mean, I don't want to say forget those things, because at least speaking to religion, that it matters, but you're not looking at that. That's not a factor of success in a sport. Um, but unfortunately, it has become that way. This issue has become so polarized, so divisive, at least in the way the media portrays it and the way our elected officials are voting. But I will say, among the general public, whether you're left, right, purple, blue, who cares?
Yeah.
Um, this really is a unifying issue. It's so unfortunate that it's not being portrayed in the way that it actually is. But it is. Look, 80% plus of Americans agree that this is wrong and harmful and ultimately regressive to allow men into women's sports or women's locker rooms or women's protected spaces. They understand that. And you and I both know there's not a lot of political issues that 80% of people can agree on. But this is
Sure.
one of them, which shows you that I think ultimately the people who are on both sides, certainly on both sides, who are using this issue almost as some sort of political pawn, it's going to really hurt the side that's not standing for common sense and for science and for sanity and for God's perfect and intentional design.
Yeah, I would agree so much with what you said, especially I will just say this. There's people in my life who are on all sides of the political spectrum, like very liberal, very conservative, Christians, non-Christians, pretty much everyone. Not even 80%. I'd say it's like 95% of the people in my life that I've had conversations about this, even if they disagree on other things, say, no, this is actually, we all can agree on this. This isn't right. It's common sense. It doesn't make any sense to have something in place that hurts, in essence, the progress that so much of what people talk about out there in the public for women. And it just doesn't make any sense. So I can say this, Riley, the people I've talked to, and some of them, you'd be like, well, okay, we're not going to agree on pretty much anything else, but this they agree on. Have you seen that? Like even privately, because publicly people are afraid, I think, to put it out there in some cases. But I bet you get a lot of DMs or just messages from people on all sides of the spectrum.
110% daily that happens.
Yeah,
Speaking in the sports arena here, you even look at someone like Martina Navratilova. There's not a
yeah,
whole lot we agree on, to be totally honest with you. She is about as left as they come in terms of
sure.
politics and different things. Of course, being a part of this community herself, she's totally on board saying, hey, I know I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had, the success that I had, if I had to compete against boys or men for that matter. And that's what it's about. It is about, unifying and advancing. We are so far past the point of agreeing and disagreeing, so it seems, in this climate that we live in, or civil discourse, or listening to each other's perspectives. Again, on both sides. Let's be very clear about that. But that's what we need, and I would say that's what's urgent in restoring some sort of unification, or again, just sanity. That's what we need. But to your point, to answer the question, yes, daily. I receive messages from parents, from female athletes themselves, from coaches, from medical providers, from spiritual leaders, even, who say, "Hey, this is we maybe not don't agree on everything, but this is wrong." Or parents who say, "Look, I have a daughter. I can't imagine my daughter, just as you said, my daughter
Yeah.
losing out on opportunities, or being injured in her sport, or being forced to share a locker room with a boy." All of those things, I hear them daily, and it breaks my heart when I hear them.
Yeah, it reminds me, my good friend, who's also now your good friend, Sage Steele, who I worked with for many years at ESPN. She went through something similar, in her departure from ESPN, and she would say, "You would be so shocked at some of the people who've DM'd me and told me, 'We're with you, Sage. I stand with you,' but they just are a little bit of afraid publicly to put it out there because the threat it might place on their jobs or their profile, if you want to call it that, or platform." And I just wonder why that would be the case. Maybe you can help us understand why, because there's a fear factor, I think, in some cases, even for people who might be all in on everything you have to say, Riley. And there's probably people listening who are like, I don't agree with a lot of things Riley is saying here, but why is it so much about fear in the sense of putting it out there publicly?
It's so true. Fear has a chokehold on everyday people now.
Yeah.
Again, in virtually every realm, whether it's in academia, in corporate America, what have you. The intimidation factors that are used. Look, I'll explain very briefly what we went through. I had to go to sensitivity training to
Hmm.
learn how to use correct pronouns, the biologically incorrect pronouns, but preferred pronouns. If I didn't complete the training to their standard, I had to re-go through the training. I was told, Riley, you're never going to get a job if you speak up. Your employer is going to look up your name. They're going to see that you're a transphobe. And you don't want that, do you? Riley, you're never going to get into grad school. You're going to lose your friends. You'll lose your scholarship. Oh, yeah. And speaking of that scholarship, remember, you signed that. And when you signed that scholarship, you gave away your rights to speak in your own personal capacity. Remember who you represent, whose name is across your chest, across your cap, because it's not yours. It's ours, Riley, and understand we have already taken your stance for you, is what my university told me. Thomas's
Hmm.
teammates, they were forced to go to mandatory weekly LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how, just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. 16 of them signed on to an email expressing their discomfort in the locker room. Some of them even being survivors of sexual assault. One of the girls being raped in a bathroom setting prior to college. Of course, this experience was traumatic for her. So they go to their administration, express their discomfort, to which the university, I swear I have a screenshot of the response. Penn responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves. They even went as
Huh.
far to tell these girls that if they did speak out and any harm whatsoever were to come towards Leah Thomas's way, whether it was physical harm, emotional harm, self-inflicted for that matter, they said, then understand you are solely responsible. And that would make you responsible for a potential death, and that would make you a murderer. And you don't want to be a murderer, do you?
Wow.
No, so I
Jeez.
suggest you be kind and I suggest you be inclusive. But I mean, let that really sink in what they're telling these girls. They told these girls they would have blood on their hands, that they would be equivalent to a murderer if they advocated for fair play and privacy in areas of undressing. And believe it or not, that's effective when you're talking to 18, 19, 20-year-old girls, telling them they're going to be murderers for standing up for themselves and their right to compete fairly. It works. I could stand on here the rest of the time and speak to the different intimidation factors that were very similar, honestly, to the same tactics they used during COVID to force us to get the vaccine or what have you. They told me during that time, Riley, you're the captain of your team. You're supposed to be the leader. You're not being a leader. You know, you're hurting your team if you don't get the vaccine. Um, the list goes on there. To which, honestly, that's when I learned to stand up for myself in 2020, prior to all this happening in 2022, because I said no. I said, you know, it's for no other reason than merely I'm young, I'm healthy. I'd already had COVID at this point. I had the natural antibodies. I don't have
Yeah.
to get that. You can't make me. And they tried everything under the sun. They told me it was mandatory, which I understand that mandatory doesn't actually mean law. All of that to say, there was a lot of external pressure, but I think we put a lot of internal pressure on ourselves. I thought a lot of these things that they told me were going to happen were going to happen. I thought I wouldn't have friends. I thought I would be ousted. I would never get a job. That is absolutely not what has happened. I haven't lost any friends. I haven't lost any family members. My dental school that I was going to, they told me, Riley, when I told them that I was going to put a pause on that for a little bit, they said, Riley, we love what you're doing. You go fight the fight. Dentistry will always be here for you. Whenever you want to come back, you have a spot. We'll hold your deposit, your application. Whenever you want to come back, you're welcome here. And that is not what I thought was going to happen. But it's a telltale sign of the untruthfulness behind the lies and the tactics that they use. It's not real. It's fabricated entirely almost.
Hmm. All right. So I've been thinking about this in my prep and just in talking to you. I was trying to think of a question that might be something you haven't heard. And I don't know, maybe you've heard this one, but you've heard a lot of praise over the last couple of years, and you've also heard a lot of criticism, maybe more criticism than praise. I don't know where the line is. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's less or more. How do you not let the praises of man and woman and the criticisms of man and woman affect your relationship with Jesus? Because you already said it in the beginning. The victory is won. Like our identity is in him. So how do you not let all of the things that you're doing and saying, which are important things to say, hear me out on that. I'm not trying to disregard those, not get in the way of just saying Christ is your identity and who you have to find your worth in. How do you not let that creep in?
It's it's a challenge, to be totally honest with you. Whether it is the
Yeah.
praise or the negative, it's virtually impossible to not let it get to you. But I will say I've over these past 2 years, really the past year or so, when I find myself getting anxious or when I find myself feeling stressed or allowing this burden to weigh on me pretty heavy, it's a great checkpoint for me
Yeah.
to just remind myself, look, I'm not giving it to the Lord. And so every time I start to feel those feelings, I kind of take a step back, remind myself exactly what you and I have both said, and the beauty of it. The battle has been won. That's the most glorious thing about this. and it allows my heart to feel light. It really does. But it's a constant kind of cycle there. You have to stay in word. You have to pray. Um, Anytime I have quiet time throughout my day, I try and resort to prayer. When I receive these negative attacks, whether in person, whether through social media, it's almost instinctual now for me to pray for those people who wish poorly and really awful things upon me.
Sure.
Um, and it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to not want to lash out. It's hard to not want to respond in the way that I think most people would, and how I want to oftentimes. But I just have to remind myself that the only place that, or the only way we will ever be satisfied, and I think that's very obvious in this movement as a whole, the only way we will ever be satisfied is when we put our identity in Christ. A lot of what I'm up against, it's fairly obvious that they're desperately trying to put their identity into something other than Christ, and you can see that
Yeah.
in their eyes, even in their facial expressions and the way that they communicate, and how violent and full of hate a lot of the opposition really is. Um, but again, the only place we'll ever feel fulfilled is putting our identity in Him. But it is a constant reminder to myself. And I'm, like I said previously as well, I'm fortunate to have anchors in my life, people who act as both an anchor and a compass for me, who can constantly point me in the right direction. That's been huge. I have a wonderful, wonderful husband who has been instrumental in my life. He certainly makes me a better person. I have a wonderful family, wonderful friends, wonderful spiritual leaders around me who are constantly checking in, asking how I'm doing. You know, what can I do to help? How can I pray for you? And those things matter, and I certainly feel the prayers.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think accountability and just people around us to encourage us in the good and the bad is important, and kind of keep us in check, if you will, sometimes when we get out of whack, which happens to all of us. All right, as we wind down, I want to get into your book real quick. Tell us about swimming against the current. I love the title, by the way, in essence of what you've kind of been through the last couple years. But why people should read it? Like, how will it encourage them? They've heard your story and they're going to read your story in depth even more in the book. But for encouragement, right, to kind of do the right thing, to follow God, tell us what you hope the encouragement would be for people who read this book.
Well, we are called as Christians, as people, to be lights in the darkness, to be exemplars of grace and truth in a world desperate for both. And I think this book is a good representation of that. Yes, of course, it speaks to the truth, to the science, to the logistics behind the what I would label the injustices and the insanity of what we're seeing happening around the country in all different sports, all different divisions, all levels, all states. This is happening. Um, but it speaks to the grace portion of this too. It really does, which I think is a way that not a lot of people have approached this conversation. And that's what's so wonderful about our Creator, about Jesus
Yes.
Christ. Look, someone who, yes, He washed the feet of sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors, and that was depicted in the Super Bowl commercial. What did it say? He gets us. I forget what the commercial was, but it
Yeah.
showed this depiction. But what that commercial left out, that's the beautiful and perfect display of grace that our Savior shows. But what that commercial left out was the truth portion, because in every account in the Bible, after Jesus is washing the feet of sinners, He says, "Now go and sin no more." And that's the accountability piece. That's the truth piece. And I think this book it does a good job of highlighting both of those things in terms of encouragement. It's multiple um, ways, gives action items for people to help, again, concerned citizens, parents, everyday people. I think oftentimes people want to get involved, they want to say something, they want to be able to defend morality, defend the principles of which this country was founded upon, but they don't really know how. There's some guidance, at least from what I have learned and I have experienced in the book. And so, again, such a crazy process. I even did the audio book, which, let me tell
Hmm.
you, Reading that back was brutal. No one tells you how hard that was. It took me like hours to be able to just go through the book in my with my own voice and my own words. But it was certainly a very fun process.
No, that's good. Yeah, someone who's written 2 books, I know the arduous, I'll just say, process of writing books, and the fact that you've been able to accomplish this at 24 is pretty awesome. And listen, don't take this the wrong way, but I really hope that we are not talking about this in 4 or 5 years because sanity has returned. Does that
Me
make sense?
too.
Is that fair?
Oh my gosh, I hope we stop talking about this tomorrow, Jason. I don't want to keep doing this. It's
Yeah.
I certainly, feel the calling and I will respond to it, but hey, I pray daily that it doesn't have to be my calling for forever.
Yeah, go to a dental school, maybe become a mom, have a couple kids, and enjoy the rest of your life and not worry about this because we can hopefully have sanity back. That's my hope.
Me too. Me too.
There you go. Well, Riley Gaines, congratulations on the book, Swimming Against the Current. Thanks for joining us. I know there's going to be people, just being completely honest, that are going to see your name as they appear on the show and be like, oh my gosh, you're having Riley Gaines on? But like, listen, man, like this is what it's about, Jesus and sports, but ultimately common sense too. And we don't get involved too much politically on shows like ours, but I'm glad that we were able to have you on. And I think what you're speaking about and what you're standing for, uh, it's common sense. I keep saying that word, I know it, but it's just common sense for our girls, for our women, and just appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you. And thank you for addressing this topic and the way that it has needed to be addressed. There's no bias. There's no smoke and mirrors here. It's real life lived experience. It's science. It's again sticking to God's truth that he so clearly lays out in the way that he says he made male and female intentionally and perfectly in his image. That's what we're speaking to.
Yeah. Thanks, Riley.
Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks for watching Sports Spectrum here on YouTube. You can click our next video or you can check out our website, sportsspectrum.com. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you next time.